Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Larry Whiteside. Larry is a CISO at RegScale and co-founder and president at Cybersity, a nonprofit with a mission to achieve consistent representation of women, underrepresented minorities, and all veterans in the cybersecurity industry. So, Larry, welcome to our Risk Management Show podcast interview today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure as well. Yeah, I know we discussed with your CEO, Anil Karmel, a few months ago about RegOps and how it differs from traditional compliance operations. And today, I believe that we will have a very thoughtful conversation on the topic of challenges with attracting and retaining cybersecurity talent and how to address this with creative recruiting strategies, and maybe about diversity, because you are the president and non-profit with a mission to achieve representation of minorities and women. So before we start, Larry, could you tell us a short story about your career path, what brought you to where you are right now, and remind us what you guys at RegScale are up to these days?
Sure. So again, thanks for having me. My career path was definitely not a straight line. A lot of people think that their career is going to be this straight line. I'm going to get this job, and then next I'm going to get this job, and it's just going to be a straight line to the top of the mountain, where a lot of people want to be a CISO. So for me, that was not the case. I did not intend on being a CISO. I sort of fell into this industry by happenstance, but it goes back to my grandfather. My grandfather was a Tuskegee Airman, and so for those who aren't aware, Tuskegee Airmen were a black group of war fighting pilots back in World War II. And if you go and look at U.S. history, they're quite famous for what they did. They're the only fighting group to never lose a plane during World War II. But he was significant for me because him being a former military officer, when I graduated college and I could not find a job, he said, "Hey, go be an officer." And I was like, I have zero interest in being in the military or flying planes, Grandpa. And he told me, technology is going to go away, but we're always going to need pilots. So you should go be a pilot. Right?
Incredible.
Yeah. But what I did find out just in going and speaking to the military was that there were technical careers that I could jump into. And so I did that. And that actually introduced me into the world of what I'll call what was at the time information security, right, in the early 90s. Right. Information security was around because the internet was new and we were starting to have interconnected systems, interconnected locations and worlds, and this World Wide Web thing had been created. And I got the opportunity to start building out what the Air Force began calling a defense in depth strategy. And so they said, hey, with this information security thing, we need to have layers. And so I got an opportunity in my role to start going down the path of building that out at the base that I was located at. And I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with it because the mindset of security, which I'm a huge proponent of, aligned to my background and my experience growing up as a youth in underserved communities. And so that drove me, and that drove my passion for the field of cybersecurity. So when I separated from the military, I immediately said, this is what I want to do. This is where, for me, my mind aligns to. So I ended up getting a number of executive roles throughout my career where I was able to pair together the leadership that I learned from being a military officer and leading, large numbers of troops and large organizations, along with my passion for cybersecurity and the mindset that I believe one has to have in order to be in the field of cybersecurity and information security and your way of thinking. And so in combining those two things, I was able to get a number of executive roles across a number of different verticals over my career, post separating from the military in the early 2000s. So I've been very fortunate. I've been a CISO in healthcare and financial services and critical infrastructure. So I've had a wonderful journey. as it relates to RegScale, RegScale this was my first soiree at jumping into the world of startups as an employee. I've been an advisor to a couple dozen startups in the cyberspace over my career, but I had yet to be an employee of a startup. But I made a very purposeful decision a year ago that I wanted to work in a startup. And so at RegScale, we are solving the problem of automation in the world of regulations and compliance and controls. So if you think about whether it's regulatory controls that you've got to meet or the frameworks that you may be looking to adhere to for cybersecurity best practices, whether it's NIST or CSF or any of those types of things, our goal is to help you automate how that happens, right? Controls automation is the thing that is going to enable organizations to move forward faster. Digital innovation has taken companies to start having technology move at the speed of business. Unfortunately, there's one area that's been holding them back, and that is this whole risk and compliance space. It's still been a very manually driven area. And as an organization, we find it very important and actually very helpful to enable security to move at the speed of business, to start working towards automation in this space. So that's our entire RegOps movement is really built around the aspect of helping to automate all of the manual processes and manual reporting and manual data gathering that have existed for decades in the compliance and regulatory space.
All right, fantastic. Because now more than ever, boardrooms need diversity of thought to address the increasingly complex and technology-driven challenges that organizations are facing. So what are the key challenges organizations face in attracting and retaining cybersecurity talent in this competitive market?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? So I think the entire industry agrees that there are open jobs. Now, why there are open jobs, there's a whole lot of debate on why there are open jobs. But the reality is we know there are jobs out there. The problem is we also agree that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. As it relates to attracting talent, we have not, as an industry, done much differently to attract talent. Now, the pandemic did open us up to an opportunity to start stopping to use location as a component of barrier, right? So, hey, went into a pandemic, everybody's working remote. Organizations are becoming more comfortable with remote working. We've put technologies and security controls in place to allow remote working. So now when you hire, you can look beyond the specific geographic footprint that you may have, focused on before. And that's been great. What the industry has yet to do is really look at the way that jobs are created, and when I say jobs, specifically the job descriptions and the requirements associated with the jobs. And I'll give you an example. There are a number of entry-level roles that literally say in the job description that a CISSP is required. And the problem with that is a CISSP requires 5 years of experience in the industry. So if you're looking for an entry level, but you're requiring a CISSP, those two things do not align. So that immediately creates a barrier within which you're not going to find people that align to that. Additionally, there are other things where you start adding in college degree required, and a number of other things that begin getting added into job descriptions as requirements for entry-level roles, and you begin to narrow the scope of the people that are actually going to fit the role that you are advertising for. And when you narrow the scope down, now your available pool becomes so small that A, you don't find someone, or B, it becomes so competitive for the narrow few people that fit that particular lens that they are basically competing for salary. And then they end up being priced out of the particular salary band that you want to pay them. So you have that from an attraction standpoint. On the other side, the retention is a challenge, because what happens is when you have someone come into your organization that fits an underserved community description. So that can be people of color, that can be BIPOC, that can be women, that can be LGBTQ plus, right? Any of those demographics that come into an organization, when they get into their organization, they're typically the minority. And so what happens is this whole component of inclusion, right, begins to fall by the wayside where, I'll give you a great example, is you get into a meeting and you are the one diverse or one of two diverse people in a room, in a large room of people, right? Your ability to feel that you are being heard gets limited because you are one of few. So you feel less inclined to share, less inclined to give your opinion, less inclined to give your real thoughts. And in the event you do, if the rest of the room has similar backgrounds, comes from similar areas, looks similar to each other, they tend to or can fall into what we call groupthink.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they can then shut down these other dissenting ideas or objective ideas that don't align to the idea of the larger group. And it takes, in those instances, strong leaders to really, sort of change the dynamic in the room. And unfortunately, right, leaders who have that ability to either see it or the strength of character to actually make the change inside the room to give voice and make these underserved people come from underserved communities and populations to feel included are not, there aren't a lot of them. So with that, you're having people from underserved communities leaving organizations, right, to go to other organizations or just leaving cybersecurity as a whole. Like right now, women of color are the at the highest rate ever leaving the field of cybersecurity. And when I talk to some who have left and gone on to other things, it's largely because they did not feel like they were included. They did not feel that there was inclusion as related to them in their roles and how they tied in what they did every day and their voice being heard to how it's going to help solve the problem of the organization.
Yeah, you describe it very, very kind of deep level. So, but what are some creative ways to incentivize cybersecurity professionals, including this minority, women of color, to stay with an organization rather than moving to competitors or freelancing or even to jump to another industry?
Yeah, so there's a number of things that can be done. So we'll start with, again, on the intake, right? If you want to attract talent, first off, I'm going to put this squarely on the shoulders largely of cyber leaders. So cyber leaders across the industry have got to do more. They've got to stand up and they've got to begin working with their heads of HR and their talent management teams to ensure that job descriptions are adequately representing what they actually need versus allowing HR and not allowing HR to drive the narrative based on HR's overall expectations. Listen, I say this a lot, but and I'm going to say it again. Cybersecurity, we are a unicorn in the technology space. You can't put the same cyber practitioners in the same bucket as IT and some other technical disciplines. We're a unicorn because the skill sets we bring to the table are different. The pay scales that we have based on those things are different. So if you try and align us based on, and this happens in HR sometimes, if you're trying to align us based on salary bands, well, the salary band of a technical person may align to the salary band of a manager on the IT side. So you can't always do things exactly the same. So cyber leaders have to take some ownership in ensuring that they are aware of and giving input to what job descriptions look like and what's mandatory, what's nice to have, and how those things are written, both from a description standpoint, describing what the role is, and from a requirement standpoint, and the things that they expect the person to bring to the table, right? So that's the attraction side. The other component of attraction side is to stop looking in the same places. You cannot think that you're going to get diverse talent if you're going to the same schools and institutions where there is no diverse talent, right? So you need to find, if you want people coming out of college, work with historically Black colleges and universities. Identify some of those that you can find, right? Stretch outside your geographic area. Look at geographic areas that have larger, diverse populations that you may not have looked at before because you were stuck into a geography where you had a physical office. Now, if you allow remote working, look outside and find these other areas where there may be these talent pools that you're looking for. And so it's just trying to be creative on the side of where do you look as you move forward. So you've got the job descriptions done right. You're doing that. Now, where do you look? Where do you post them? Where do you start seeking out talent? The where becomes uber important for you to start expanding beyond your typical base. I'll give you an example. There are a number of organizations in Silicon Valley, large tech companies, right, that are, Fortune 250 companies that only looked at Stanford. And they would say to me, well, we can't find diverse talent, Larry. And I said, because you're only looking at Stanford. And it's nothing against Stanford, but if you want diverse talent, you're going to have to look outside Stanford. You're going to have to look at other, right, potential universities that are developing talent that comes from these underrepresented communities. So once you do that, and the ones that I spoke to did eventually, and as they did, they began to find that talent because they looked outside of what their normal viewpoint was. The last piece is cyber leaders are going to have to take ownership in ensuring that they're creating workplaces that give people voice and make people feel heard, right? And a lot of organizations are creating what's called ESGs, these employee groups that or ERGs, sorry, employee resource groups, where it's enabling people to come together that are like-minded and like backgrounds coming from these underserved communities. It gives them a community inside their workplace that they can feel more connected, right? And so cyber leaders and HR have got to start working together in concert to do more things to make these underrepresented groups feel connected inside the organization that they share, and help them understand how what they do on a daily basis is tying to the overall what the business is trying to accomplish, and giving them voice, ensuring that they feel that they're being heard, not that their ideas have to be used, right? Because it's not about ensuring that these underserved communities have their ideas used and put into the strategy. It's that they feel someone heard them and that their idea was actually taken into account as it relates to overall strategy. You can still say that's not an alignment. You can say we choose not to do that. But if they don't feel heard at all, it's way worse than at least allowing them to feel heard, but not choosing that particular thing that they're asking for.
Right, yeah. So I would like to ask you a personal point of view. What are the major misconceptions in the field of cyber security professionals hiring, and that you kind of disagree with?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. So one major thing I disagree with is when we talk about diversity in tech and in cybersecurity, and people hear me talk about the need for diversity, they automatically go to race and gender. Yes, those are important, but diversity is not just about race and gender. It's about diversity of thought. The reality is we need people in cybersecurity that are thinking in multiple ways about how to solve problems, right? And so neurodiversity is a component of diversity. Age diversity is a component of diversity, right? Looking at people and basically come to the table with a different way to think about solving the problem. And the reality is we have to do it because the threat actors that we are dealing with on a daily basis do not care what people look like. They do not care what age people are. They do not care what their gender is. They do not care what their sex or anything is. For them, they want people who are going to think outside the box of what is normal. So on our side, as it relates to being defenders and protecting our organizations and data and the consumers as a whole. We've got to ensure that our teams mirror what the threat actors are doing. And so if we don't get people who are more open to thinking outside the box and challenging the status quo and thinking about how we do things differently to solve the problems, then we're going to continue to fall further and further behind.
All right. So because we are driving to the end of our interview, so if we summarize, if someone who is listening to our interview would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would that be?
Yeah, so for me, my takeaways are always about action. If you truly believe that diversity in cybersecurity is important, right? You as an individual have to take some action. You can't say, you know what, that's great. I agree. I can't wait until somebody does something. It's not going to happen. If you look at every, it doesn't matter where in the globe it's happened, but look at every aspect of change that's happened anywhere in the globe, right? It's not just impacted people that stand up. It's people that are allies that also believe that change is needed, that stand up and raise their hand and do something to help drive the change, right? So that means if you are a leader in cybersecurity, you have a responsibility to work with your HR team. You have a responsibility to work with your executive leadership team to identify how do you change the narrative of hiring differently? How do you change the narrative of attracting differently? And how do you change the narrative of including and giving people voices that have not been heard? If you are a day-to-day practitioner, whether it's you're part of a team or whether you're an individual contributor, you as an individual need to make your leadership know and hold your leadership accountable to taking those actions. Your voice as a member of a team, your voice as a member of an organization is important and should be heard by your leadership so that they know that this is important, not to just you, but to the viability of the business and the goal that you have as a cyber practitioner in protecting the organization.
Great. So Larry, fantastic. These were all my questions. If I forgot to ask you something that you regard as very important to our audience, please go ahead.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I think we discussed a lot of things. I will say that, you know, this topic is one that gets talked about a lot. And I'm glad that we're talking about it with risk professionals. We tend to, for this topic, we have talked about a lot in the vein of cybersecurity, and the cybersecurity community is relatively small compared to some of the other disciplines. So, but risk is a component now, right? As you've watched probably over the last few years, risk has become more of a conversation in the space of cyber. And so I think that there's got to be a lot more collaboration between cyber and risk professionals, right? Where we are talking together and identifying the strategies of how do we align the cyber problems that we have to the risk-based things that you guys have been doing for decades, right? Risk is far more mature than cyber is because you've got operational risk, fiduciary risk, and all these other components of risk. And I think that it's time that we create sort of a brotherhood or a sisterhood or a family between risk and cyber, where we start speaking more of the same language so that we can help the boards of directors and those at the executive leadership teams understand the tie between the two, because it's ever so critical that we start to get that more aligned and get what I'll say our talking points aligned together, because the risk that you guys talk now directly aligned to the cyber challenges that we're having.
Fantastic. This was spot on. So, Larry, thanks again for participating in our podcast. And it was great addition to Anil's discussion about the topic of RegOps. So I wish you a great success with your company. And thank you.